Hello, and welcome to this discussion about term limits. All right. Oftentimes, but not always, but generally, right, in the modern conservative ideological camps, we hear a bunch of talk about term limits. And people say we ought to have term limits because we have bad politicians and we need to only limit them to a couple of terms. And then this is going to somehow make us have a better system of government, better officials. All right. Here's why we on the traditional, coming from the traditional conservative, classical, paleo, traditional conservative, old right, whatever you want to call it. This is why we oppose term limits. Okay, look, think about it. Now, you say, well, I'm sure you oppose, it's kind of bright, isn't it? I'm sure you oppose getting rid of the constitutional amendment that limits the president to being elected only twice. And the answer would be no, we do not oppose getting rid that amendment. We would like to repeal the amendment from 1951 that said a person can be elected president only twice. No, we don't support that. We don't support term limits for Congress. We don't support term limits for state governors, state legislature, local, county, mayor, city council, any of that. I'll tell you why. Or this is why we do not support term limits. Look, the problem is not in the number of years a person holds office. Now, the argument is that, oh, they'll gain too much power, like Franklin Roosevelt, and they can become a dictator, whatever, or dictatorial. They're not going to gain too much power and become dictatorial if the voters are wise to what's going on, if you have an educated populace. If you term limit people, then they become a lame duck upon their second term. They can't run again. So now they have no accountability. You can't call, you want to have the possibility of re-election hanging over their head. Then they'll be more responsive to the voters, okay? Once you say, well, you can only be elected twice or serve this many years, once they get past the point where they can not be reelected, they have no accountability to the voters. So you might say, well, you're a conservative, so I guess you would have opposed Barack Obama getting elected a third time. I personally would have opposed it. I wouldn't have voted for him. But logically following our theoretical viewpoint, we would say, no, Barack Hussein Obama should have been allowed to run for a third term, a fourth term, a fifth term, however many presidential terms. Congress should not be term limited. The Senate, Supreme Court, etc. That is not the problem, okay? What if you get a good office holder, like say someone who would fit our viewpoint, conservative, free enterprise, right? Anti-war. Because the old right is anti-war. We're not talking about the neoconservatives, which is not really conservative. That's a false conservative. Well, we don't want to limit their term. We want them in office 40, 50 years if they're good, if they're promoting good legislation, opposing imperialism, opposing foreign wars, opposing interfering with federalism and state sovereignty. No, we want those people in there as long as possible, from age 25 to 95, you know. The problem we have, the real solution is to get more quality voters out there. Okay, we want a better voter pool. How do you do that? Well, you want to prevent voter fraud. You don't want non-citizens voting, for sure. No convicted criminals. We would not support that. We don't want to vote in. That's not the kind of people you need running. You say, well, they serve their time. Let them vote. Yeah. Okay. Fine, let them vote. We're talking about a very tiny part of the population anyway, but okay, let's go on with that. Well, so we need more qualified voters. How do you get that? Well, you have stricter voting requirements. We have two, in our opinion, the right wing, old right. There's two easy window or opportunity to vote. The ability to vote is too easy. You say, well, that's a right. There should be no restrictions on people's rights. They have age restrictions. No one's saying 10-year-olds should vote. Convicted criminals. You have to be a citizen to vote. That's a restriction, right? If you're not a citizen of the United States, it's not your right to vote in our country. I don't have a right to vote in Mexico's elections, and I don't make that demand. Why would I demand to vote in Mexico's elections? I'm not a Mexican citizen. It doesn't make any sense. It's insanity. So should we raise the age to vote and get rid of that amendment? Not necessarily. I think, honestly, I would not have supported that amendment. That should be left up to the states. Same thing with the amendment saying no state shall violate, forbid people to vote on the basis of sex. In other words, giving women the right to vote. That amendment did not give women the right to vote. That amendment only said that states could not forbid women from voting. Okay, it didn't give them the right to vote. Women had the right to vote in Wyoming since 1867. That was the first territory, later a state. It allowed women to vote. Then other liberal states out west and up north started letting more and more. They say women can vote. Other states did not, for whatever reason. But we say it should be determined on a state-by-state basis. Okay, well, let's look at more important things than that. Yes, we do support literacy tests. People should be literate when they vote. There should be a literacy test. Now, I'm not saying use that as a tool to discriminate. Use it. Yeah, you use it as a tool to discriminate against ignorance and illiteracy and incompetence. So yeah, you are discriminating against illiteracy, incompetence, and inability to grasp certain things. So yeah, people should have to read and write. You want to drive a car, right? You have to pass a competency test. You say, well, that's a right to drive. Yeah, it is your right to drive a vehicle. There's certain rules. You say, well, that could hurt somebody. You could crash and hurt someone if you're driving incompetently. Yeah, well, you can crash and hurt the country if you're voting incompetently. You can vote for the wrong people. In other words, people that are demagogues, want to take other people's money, hurt the country, support imperialism, support war, foreign wars. So yeah, we want better voters. A literacy test. You should know the basics of government. Why is a person voting if the test says, you say, well, they can't read the test. They don't speak English. Okay, well, they should speak English to vote in America. They say English should be an English country. If you vote in Mexico, you should be able to speak Spanish. If you can't speak Spanish, don't go to Mexico and ask to vote. Don't become a citizen, okay? That's our viewpoint, English speaking country. Yeah, so we support that. We support a national identity based on the English language. Why? Because that's the major language, and that brings unity to the country. Now you might say, well, you don't support diversity. We do support diversity. If you want to have an ethnic festival or Greek heritage night at a baseball game, that's wonderful. We think that's great, but not for voting. You want to have unity. Ask Yugoslavia if diversity helped their country, ethnic diversity, and contentiousness. So we want unity. English. Okay, if I go to Italy, I think I should learn Italian if I want to vote. You should know the basics of government. If you want to vote and I give you a test and I say, what are the 3 branches of government, and you don't know, I don't want you voting. We don't want you voting. What's the capital of the United States? You don't know. Okay. You don't know the basics of when the country was. I don't mean you have to know intricate details. And we're going to give trick questions. We're not talking about that. Those are not valid questions. Or, when I used to teach school, I did not like trick questions, because the purpose of a test is to see, did the student learn the material, not to trick them into getting it wrong. That's a test of something else, not the content. So we want good, valid questions. What is the role? What branch of government makes rulings upon the law? If they think it's the executive, no, they carry out the law. They should know basics about the military, like name 3 of the 5 branches of the military. Here's a list of states which are out west. Now, if they think Maine and Florida are out west, that's not a good sign, you see. Or simple things like this. Here's some symbols. Which of these are national symbols of the United States? If they think a swastika and the rising sun, or the tricolor, freedom, fraternity, equality, and liberty, the French tricolor is a U.S. symbol, then this is a problem. So I don't want to go in, we could just name basic things such as that. 3 levels of government: local, state, and federal. Which state has parishes? Most people probably ought to know Louisiana has parishes. The rest of the country has counties, things like that. Rocky Mountains. I don't mean great detail. We're not talking about the people have to be scholars to vote, but have some basic knowledge. And that's what I mean. If you don't know the difference between a governor and the president, or the legislature and the executive, or the difference between a bill and a law, this is a problem. Why are you voting? You should not be voting, okay? Because you're choosing people to run the government and you don't understand the government. You don't understand basic concepts. So we really have to crack down on that. We've loosened up voting requirements in the last 50 years, as we all know. And what has happened to the quality of the politicians? And I'm not saying they were ever that good, because politics attracts the worst sort of people, not the best and the brightest, but the most, but the greediest, totalitarian mindset, oriented people, welfare, warfare, state people. That's because, that's what they know government is useful for demagogues and dangerous folks. But it's gotten much worse. So the quality of the office holder has gone down the last 50 years as the requirement for voting has gone down. And then we have these recruiting drives. We got to basically bribe and beg people to go vote, because on their own volition, they're just not going to take the time to go vote. You got to go drive them to the polls with free food and all of this. Well, if they were qualified voters, they would go on their own to vote. You see, they would vote, and it's not that hard to register. You don't need to help people register to vote. It's very simple to vote. If they don't know how to register to vote, they shouldn't be voting. It's very easy to vote. Registering and voting is easy. And plus now with early voting, you could just vote at your convenience. So we don't support term limits, because you're getting rid of people that perhaps are very good in office and are voting the right way. And we mean the right way, the right-wing way, the anti-war, good government, low spending, less spending, less taxes, more personal responsibility, more free enterprise, less war, less imperialism, more state power, more local control, more freedom, right? And how do you get that? By limiting people in office? No. Because if term limits just recycle bad and then another bad politician and another bad politician, and they take turns being bad politicians, bad office holders, that's not the solution. And then you get all the lame ducks. No, we want no term limits at any level of government. and we want more educated voters. Much stricter voting requirements. Would we support property qualifications, that you have to own a certain amount of property to vote? We actually would support that. Not to be a millionaire, you know, but to have some. You say, well, that you mean they should be stakeholders. They should have some stake in the government, something to lose. That's right. And that's why we support some minimal property qualifications for voting and the literacy test. And yes, to sum this up and to end this talk, we would support a poll tax. Oh, the good thing about a poll tax, it's a nominal fee. You know, like you have to pay a registration fee to drive, and people pay $20 a year. And then another $10 a year for inspection sticker. We're talking about $30 a year. Now, I see people that obviously have very little money. They're on their phones all day and playing video games and ordering all kind of stuff, frivolous things. So they can scrounge their money, they can always afford cigarettes or beer, malt liquor, beer. So if you made a poll tax that was $10 a year, let's say, or let's get a bet. $10 is not a lot of money to. Let's say $20 a year to vote, but I would go with 10. But let's say $20 a year, you have to pay a poll tax to vote. Now, there's some people that are the unqualified voters. They would never do it because they're not interested in voting anyway. You know, you understand? You have to drive out there to beg them to vote and drive them to the polls and practically drag them to the polls. Well, if they have to pay $20 a year to vote or $10 a year to vote, you know what? They're not going to vote. They're not paying the money. They're not going to pay that $10 to register, that registration fee and that annual fee, that fee, that tax, the poll tax. So then you weed out a lot of the disinterested and unqualified, incompetent voters. Then you've got a much better voting pool. And notice that none of this is based on race or ethnicity or gender, sex. It's saying anybody can vote. Anybody can vote, whatever race, whatever religion, whatever, how tall or short they are, however, underweight, overweight, perfect weight, in shape, out of shape, liberal, moderate, conservative, right wing, left wing, whatever, doesn't matter. They can vote. Got to be qualified. Take the literacy test, take the competency test, pay the nominal poll tax, own a nominal, even, yes, we'd go that far, even own a nominal amount of property. Then you get the good voters. Now, would this be hard to do in the current climate? Yes, but that's why we do the political discussions. We want people to be brave and resolute and not fearing, and supporting free enterprise, supporting the anti-war movement, opposing the imperialism movement, the opposing imperialism, I should say. I guess that's a movement. Try to dominate the world, I guess that's a movement. And that's what we have to put out there. And that people might come at you, opposing you, calling you names and all that. Well, we can't worry about that because we're not calling them names. I watch this on Facebook and everything. These people like on the right wing, usually they're not really right wing. They're mostly like neoconservatives, and they'll just post stuff all day, ridiculing the left and making fun of liberals. And I don't know what that's supposed to accomplish, because they're like singing songs to each other, like you're preaching to your own choir, because everybody that joined your group is obviously neoconservative. So they're going to say, right on, brother. And then you got the left wing, and they're going to all join their groups and say, right on, brother. And so I don't know who you're trying to convince. And the ridicule approach, I don't think is a good approach. Like I was just on Facebook a few minutes ago, and somebody posted, what do they call these memes? First they show in 1863, the Democrats said, we need slaves to pick our cotton. How can we pick cotton without our slaves? And then 2018, we need these illegal immigrants to pick our crops. And I said, that's an unfair comparison. I wrote that comment. because that's a nonsensical comparison. It makes no sense to try to equate the 1863 Democrats with today. Is stupidity. They're not the same party. Anybody who's educated knows that the Democratic Party transformed in the 1890s from the arch conservative party, the actual conservative party, and it started to transform into the progressive, liberal, imperialist, etc. party. Okay. And most people don't even understand these concepts. They don't understand history. And so when you're looking at these neoconservative ideas, they twist everything around. They'll say, well, the socialists today, the liberals today are like the Nazis of the 1930s. They're not like them. That's incorrect. And they say, well, they're socialists and Hitler and them were national socialists, so they're the same. Only in the sense that they favored big government and restrictions on the economy because they were socialists. Yes, that's right. But they were not the same in most of the other areas. Okay, so National Socialism and fascism, yes, they have a socialist base in an economic sense. But their whole worldview is very, very, very different and basically the opposite of the international socialism, Marxism, communism. Okay, but these people will run around on Facebook talking about they're the same. They're not the same. And then they'll say, well, the liberals today want to take your guns just like Hitler and them took away guns and then set up a dictatorship. Well, that right there, that's telling you they don't understand history. Because the National Socialist government in Germany actually loosened the gun restrictions. If you ever study, the Hitler government made it easier for German citizens, not Jews, of course, but who made up 2% of the population. But for 98%, or let's say 90, because criminals, whatnot, could not get guns. But for 90% of the population, it actually became easier to own weapons in Germany during 1933 to 1945. So there's this fantasy that they were confiscating everyone's guns and then they were forced to live under a dictatorship. That's a total, they don't know their history. That's not what happened. Just do some research on gun laws in National Socialist Germany. They were relatively liberal about that. And then you'll have the memes, and I'm not going to go on and on because I made the point. Then you have the memes about, oh, in the American Revolution, the British tried to take our guns, and then we rose up, and that's what we're going to do against the liberals today. Well, wrong again, wrong again. There was not some plan by the British government to confiscate personal ownership of weapons in the 13 colonies. The British were not going around trying to confiscate people's hunting rifles, muskets, and handguns. Wrong again. Now, there was an effort to seize stockpiles of military weapons, which were being stockpiled in New England, Massachusetts, which the British knew were about to be used in a revolt against the government. So yeah, there was an attempt to seize military-grade stockpiles of weapons that were going to be used in a revolt against the government. Now, you try to stockpile weapons and let the government today find out you're planning a revolt and see how open-minded they're going to be towards you, whether it's a liberal or a neoconservative president in office today. You see, so that's a total misunderstanding of history. So we want competent voters, right-wing or left-wing, not people that believe these fantasies. Because in 1875, there was virtually no restriction on gun ownership. None. You didn't need a gun license. You could just buy a weapon with cash or, coins, silver or gold. And there was no plan to confiscate people's guns. And then if you tell these people this on these conservative groups, they might kick you out. But they always say the liberals won't tolerate dissent. The liberals won't tolerate any dissenting opinions. But then if you bring up a point that's going against their generalized thinking, they'll kick you out. Well, then maybe you're a closet liberal, or maybe you are guilty of what you accuse them of doing. But what else are you going to do if you're ignorant? You got to kick people out if you don't know your own history, but you claim you're a political website or a political group, I should say. It's very comical in a sick, demented way. Let's see what the comments say, and then I'm going to get off of this. Good morning, Ron, says John and Neely. Good morning to you. I oppose term limits. Let the voters decide. I say that too. If you're limiting available terms, then you're limiting the voters' rights. You're limiting their democratic right to pick the leader of their choice. Craig said, this is so, Craig Swenson, hey Craig, this is so interesting. Sorry I missed the beginning. I'll go back and watch after. Oh, that's okay. I also missed the beginning of this stream, but it's very interesting. I will watch the beginning later. Okay. So that's the whole point of this video. We oppose term limits for the reasons I already laid out. And how do we solve bad politicians? Well, you're never going to solve it completely because that's the nature of the person that the office attracts. Political office tends to attract the worst and the greediest in our society, not the best and the brightest. But that being said, you want to limit the damage, so to speak. And the way you limit the damage is you make much stricter voting requirements. So that's the summary of what we're saying today. We're opposing term limits. We're supporting higher quality voters. We want to make a much higher quality voter pool. Okay? And that is the only way. Dr. Frosty Bruce says, definitely very interesting. I doubt things will change, though. Well, we want to be positive, you see, because a lot of the mindset today in the political discussion is gloom and doom, right? There is no hope. Give up. Don't worry about it. You can't win. You'll never win. The country's gone. There's no hope. It's the end of the world as we know it. Buy my CDs and tapes and watch how you could survive the end of the world. I've been hearing that since I was 10 years old. Be a survivalist. Be a survivalist. Go into your own shell. Ignore the world and wait for the rapture. Jesus will come back, and buy my CDs and DVDs. Buy my DVDs and come to my seminar and pay a fee. You know, that whole scam thing. No, 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 no. We don't want you to give up. We, you know, I'm talking about the real conservative movement, the old right. We're very confident and very positive. We're not out there preaching gloom and doom. What? After all, that's why we're always positive. And that's why a lot of people on the left are so angry all the time. They're angry, and they talk about hate speech, but they're the ones that use the hate speech, you see, calling people names, talking about let's have punch somebody day. We punch people we don't like and all this. Of course they're angry. Of course they're high strung. Of course they're all wound up because they have this nagging thought in the back of their head that they just might lose. Well, we're very upbeat. We're very confident, especially in the last going on 2 years since the events of November 2016. We are not downbeat, but we're upbeat because we are going to win, and we know we're going to win. You know, we have the ideas to back us up, not the hysteria, the anger, the hatred, the ridicule. That's not what we didn't build our foundation on that. Our foundation was built on solid principles of government, you see. So you can be very confident when you're not trying to defend war, and you're not trying to defend imperialism, and you're not trying to defend evil, okay? Now, if I was a liberal, yeah, I'd be very wound up and angry all the time because I would be trying to defend evil, so I would have a bad feeling in my head. If I was a neoconservative, yes, I'd be very wound up and defensive because then you have to go out there and try to defend dropping atom bombs on people. Yeah, you have to be wound up to defend that and defensive. Well, we're saying we oppose dropping atom bombs on people so we can be confident and be nice and not get wound up and hateful and use ugly terms against other people, you see. And so to wrap this up, John Neely says, we the people, not we the government. Right. We're supposed to be the government. Term limits can empower corrupt politicians and political parties, in my opinion. Yes, they not only can they do. They do. John Neely says, national punch somebody in the face day, laugh out loud. Yeah, well, I see people saying these hateful things. No, but we're saying everybody should have a right to say what they want, even no matter how ridiculous it is. And that's what we believe. We believe in freedom of speech. Freedom of speech. We don't believe in putting people in jail for asking questions about topics. We don't believe in putting people in jail for expressing opinions about topics. If people want to say ridiculous things, we support it. It should be a battle of ideas. And if your idea is so wonderful, you should be able to promote your idea without trying to stop the other person from talking. And you should be able to promote your idea without calling other people names. And you should be able to promote your idea without using the law to really intimidate the people from expressing their opinions. So that's the way we feel about it. And that's how we're going to end this talk. And I appreciate you watching this video production. Thank you very much. And have a nice and wonderful Sunday. And we'll do some other discussions down the road.